Hey everybody, Nick Kypreos here for the Real Kipper at Noon show. Yes, we are in the off season, so what we're going to do is pop up every once in a while and maybe just update. We're still full of opinions. We still got things that we want to say, even though we're in the off season. And what a week it was in terms of the draft, in terms of the buyouts, in terms of free agency, and the storylines have followed. One of the biggest storylines, of course, in this offseason in 2020 is this goaltender carousel. So I think it's only appropriate that my next guest is a goaltender and one that's had stops in Tampa Bay, New Jersey, Columbus, Dallas, Ottawa, Philly. Mike McKenna from Las Vegas, AT&T Sportsnet. He covers the Knights on a pretty daily basis. It's only appropriate if we're going to do carousels. You're on the show today because you were on one your whole career.
You just described it in a nutshell. I was as the ultimate journeyman. I mean, you can look in my room here. I've got I don't know how many jerseys at this point. 9 different NHL. I mean, I played for teams that don't even show up on my hockey database. You know,
that's
like
awesome.
I had games in Florida and games in Vancouver that I backed up, but I didn't play a game. So, yeah, myself and Sean Burke, we have the record. Most NHL teams for goaltenders, 9. And
I love it.
He probably only has a couple hundred or maybe 1,000 more games than I do.
Has Berkey got the jerseys like you lined up there? I love them. Are all of them there?
Not all of them. There's, the great white whale hanging out is my Vancouver Canucks jersey. I backed up 2 games for them in 18-19 behind Jacob Markstrom, who we'll talk about more, I'm sure, in a little bit. But I can't find that jersey. It's gone.
Have you
the team sold it. I know it's been sold. I know it's out there. And I know that without question, I've put it out enough in the social media world that whoever has it has to know that I want it and I would gladly buy it back, but they aren't budging on it.
Have you talked to the pros, the ones that buy and sell these things on a daily basis? Have you touched base with them at all? Because I know a few here in Toronto. I'm going to start the search for you, pal.
Yeah, we've got some feelers out there. There's 2 people that are apparently huge Mike McKenna fans. And I can't believe that I'm saying that, especially in the third person.
And they're not related to you?
No, thankfully. But they've hoarded McKenna jerseys. And actually, I know them both. They're super nice guys. And I've actually traded them a few things to get some of these jerseys and always give them, whatever market value was for what they purchased them for. But yeah, I mean, some teams will give you a jersey at the end of the season. But for a guy like me who didn't finish the year in the NHL very often, a lot of those jerseys just went off into the abyss. So I've had to kind of reclaim them afterwards.
Well, good luck with the search, and I'm going to put some feelers out too, and see if we can locate a few of them for you. It's funny. Just before we came on air with you, there was a brief discussion on how you got involved with goaltending, and it was the love of the equipment for you.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Oh, 100%. Yeah.
The pads, the chest pad, the blocker, the glove. What was it?
Well, here's what I was so lucky, Kip, is that my dad's an off-ice official with the NHL for the St. Louis Blues. So I grew up in St. Louis. My grandpa did it as well since the team's inception, and they used to pay them with season tickets. It didn't used to be an NHL job. Now it is, which is good because it keeps things a little bit more even. But I'd always get in the door early for games. Dad had to be there early, just like a player. He'd be there an hour and a half, 2 hours ahead. And I just gravitated to the visiting team, and I would see Kelly Rudy come in with a bandana on and all this crazy gear. And then Patrick Waugh, the Montreal Canadiens would come to town once a year. And, and he skates out and he's like got this aura about him that it's Patrick Waugh. And so I was just drawn to the equipment from the get-go. And I still am. I always prided myself on trying to have, super good looking gear and helmets that were, representative of not just the team, but kind of personality. And I'm surrounded by them now.
And your parents didn't try to talk you out of it or anyone in your family, because if I was watching what was going on with NHL goaltenders today, that would be ample reason for me not to put my kid at age 6 or 7 between the pipes. It's, I'm a little older than you. I think you know that already, but I've never seen it like this before, Mike. What do you make of it?
Well, it's wild because it just shows how much To me, it speaks to how good goaltending is across the board, that you're splitting hairs so much between goalies. You can get a guy at $3 million who, in the public perception, just isn't good enough compared to the guy that now is at $5 million. And it didn't used to be like that. There was this big delta between a starter and a backup. And we don't see that any longer. There's very few guys that you can say stand out absolutely head and shoulders in terms of like really dialing in on them as goalies. But again, that public perception is still there. So we're at this stage now where having a tandem goaltender is so beneficial to teams. You need two guys that can do that. And it's one way it's taken the market and made a lot of value for goaltenders across the board, but it's also depressed the top end value and made everybody be upset with their goalie because they're never good enough until you win the cup.
Maybe Hudobin's the one to really blame in all of this, because we always looked at him as a solid NHL backup. But
that was his
then
label.
He takes his team to the Stanley Cup final, and to your point, hey, we can go find someone like Hudobin who is a fraction of the cost of, say, a Carey Price.
Yeah. Well, it's been his label. Like, he's a great backup. And that's kind of the problem that I see, is that there's still that mentality that once a goalie gets a label, they can't break out of it. And Hudobin showed that he can do it over the course of a run, but there's always going to be the questions, and he can't fight that. And that's how it circled back to him ending up having a $3.5 million deal with Dallas again. It's familiarity. It's knowing that Bishop may not be healthy. He's going to get to play. If you go somewhere else, do you get those same opportunities? And does anybody truly believe that you're a number one guy? Like, you may believe it in your heart of hearts. We all think we're number ones. I thought I was a number one. I thought I could have had a chance. If this would have happened in my career, maybe I stick in the show as a number one for 10 years. Well, obviously people didn't believe that about me, and probably for good reason. But that's what you fight. You need that opportunity and you have to run with it. And the older you get, the more that's stacked against you. And that really worked against Hudobin being 33 years old.
Mike, I often tell people that I honestly believe that the closest that we had to a professional golfer are goalies. And I only say that because you're all talented to a certain extent now more than ever. You've kind of been groomed all the same way. And yet it really comes down to what is between the ears on a daily basis. And you see starving golfers who are scratch golfers their whole life, but are poor on the tour because they just don't have that extra mental edge. Am I close when I compare golfers to goaltenders?
Yeah, fair for sure. And there's a lot of things that go into goaltending. You have to have the technical base. You have to have the physicality to do it. Your body has to work for it. But the truly elite guys, nothing phases them. They can get through anything and be totally calm, let the game come to them. They're not chasing it. How many times have we said, this guy would be a great goaltender if he could just put it together? It happens all the time. And those guys end up being your 2-3 or your backup, what that used to be, their 1B. And you know what? By the time they're 31, 32, 33, mentally, they would have been capable of being a number one, but they didn't do it early enough in their career to really grab that role as a top guy. And that's why sometimes those guys end up backfilling as really good, 1Bs, backups, whatever you want to call them, later in their career because they couldn't put it together quick enough early.
Seems we can go in any era, any decade and find prime examples of what you're talking about. Okay, so let's start. There's a long list since the end of the season on what's transpired with the goaltenders and the storylines. Let's start with your team, the one that you cover on a daily basis, and that's Vegas Golden Knights. And maybe the carousel really started not in this off season, but the moment they traded for Robin Lehner, and just your overall thoughts on where that situation is, Mike, and where you see it going between Fleury, who we all believe now is here to at least start the season, and Robin Lehner, who just recently put a pen to paper officially with his $25 million contract.
It was a pretty rocky ride for a while. And it was hard to believe that because it was such a position of strength. But is $12 million tenable in goal? I don't think it's ideal. I don't think that's what teams want to spend. I'm not sure that's what the Golden Knights really wanted to do. So now you have two goaltenders that are total number ones in the league, 100%. Let's see how that dynamic plays out. We don't know how that's going to work for a long haul, but it's a strength for them. It just is amazing that it got to this point because Robin Lehner comes in and it was expected he'd be, an ancillary piece to Fleury, that Fleury was going to still be able to carry the load. And Lehner comes in and he plays great. And they come back from the pause and they get into camp and Lehner's just a wall in practice. And, for me, that's not as indicative as games. Games are all that matter. Well, it carried over into games for him as well. Fleury had an injury in training camp, missed a couple days, didn't find his rhythm until later, had one good game in the return in the round robin preseason, had one that wasn't great. And next thing you know, Robin Lehner's the starter for the playoffs. And I don't think people expected that. I thought that Marc-Andre Fleury would have the benefit of the doubt being the guy there, being the heart of that team and the city in some ways, and it didn't happen. And obviously we know everything that happened after that, whether it's the tweet, whether it's the split playing time. I'm curious to see, though, how moving forward, because as you said, they're there. And the way the cap is, I don't see either of them going anywhere, certainly not Robin Lehner. I think you might see the most. I think might see the most motivated Marc-Andre Fleury you've seen in a long time.
Yeah, and okay, so let's check Fleury and Lehner off to the side, and this is me talking to a goaltender, and me who's talking about being a part of teams my whole life, where I never saw once a situation work, Mike, where two guys thought that they were number one goalie and they could live in harmony. So you tell me, in your experience, when you have two guys who think that they're the number one, can they truly get along on a hockey team? Or do you need to at least start out with a true number one and a backup and then let it almost evolve, naturally, organically?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't seen guys rotate since Garth Snow and Ron Hextall with the Flyers in the 90s. That was the last example I could think of two guys doing that and actually having some success with it over the long haul into playoffs. I agree with you in that sense, but I think nowadays we're in a stage of the NHL where goalies are realizing that tandems are here and they're for real. And I look at Bishop and Hudobin actually as a great example of that. Bishop played 40 games, Hudobin played 30. That's not a traditional starter backup. Remember when Grant Fuhr would play 77 games in a year, and whoever was the warm body was just having beers on the plane after the game and happy to eat some pucks in practice and collect a paycheck. Totally different ball game now. So I do think that it's going to be an adjustment period for sure, right? I don't think Robin Lehner signs that contract thinking that he's going to be anything but the guy. I don't think Marc-Andre Fleury thinks that he's going to be anything but the guy. So now, how do they manage that? I do think today, though, that goalies are better about it. I think that goalies, in terms of their friendships and the way that they work together, they're not as adversarial as they used to be. Ed Belfour used to not talk to his goalie partners, used to make it hard on them. That doesn't happen as often anymore. I do think it can work, but I think at some point somebody's got to grab the net, though, and start to take that lion's share. I don't see just a straight rotation being the successful way to do it, because I think your teammates need to know who's in the net and they need to know how to play with them. Just stylistically, from an emotional standpoint, all those things. You still need one guy that you can lean on to really be your rock back there.
And Marc-Andre Fleury, we know he's so well known to have one of the best attitudes around. He publicly came out in an article with The Athletic stating that I want to stay, possibly retire here. My family loves it. Big part of the community. I can make this work. Were you surprised?
I know how much he loves the city, and I've talking to him, he has a true, deep, passionate feeling that that's the place that he wanted to be. But I think it definitely took some soul searching to get to that point. How could it not? I mean, really, like, you've done everything you can for a franchise and all of a sudden you're on the bench. That's a huge pill to swallow. And sometimes it takes stepping back for a month or two and having deep discussions with people to be able to do that. But don't you still want to be the guy? Like 100% the guy. He's I feel like for him, there's got to be something of a factor of I'm sick of getting walked on because I have this reputation of just being the nice guy, you know? And for me, I love to see how he's going to respond to that. Like I said, like I think he could be the most motivated Marc-Andre Fleury we've seen in a long time and could really come out and try to make a statement and just absolutely blow the doors off again and grab that net.
Okay, now you're taking a truth serum right now on the Real Kipper at Noon show, okay?
What are you accusing me of here? Come on.
You've been in enough scenarios where you can honestly now tell me and our listeners and our viewers, internally, you cheer against a guy when he's in net.
Oh, you cracked the code, Kip. You did.
Come on.
Here's the thing.
I cheered for guys to get hurt who played left wing.
Well, you know what? I got to tell you something right off the bat here. Growing up in St. Louis, there's a lot of people in this city, or in the city I grew up in, that really have a lot of hate for you.
Oh, I know.
When
Didn't
you
they
ran
make it
over
up to them, though?
oh, that was like a dagger to the fans of the city because they thought for sure you killed their dreams.
I know.
But hey, Kip, you're right though in that I would never root bad for anybody in terms of just their health and their well-being or anything. But there is that competitive fire in you that when they go in the net, you don't want them to play well. Like none of us want to admit that. We don't. We always want to say this externally and project that we're just rooting for everybody. But man, you still want that net, and your pride just says, "I'm better. I can do better. I know I could have made that save." It's always there.
And I want that chance when he sucks and I get it tomorrow. I get my net back tomorrow.
Give me what I can do. Let me show what I can do to prove it.
I knew it. I knew it about you goaltenders.
Oh, you're right. You're right. And the funny part is that we preach so much to our goalies, like young goalies on teams, if you're coaching, that you got to lift each other up. You got to support. And you do. Like outwardly, you have to do that. You got to be friends with each other. You got to be a good teammates. Your goalie partner's the only guy who knows what's going on in the room.
Yes.
For a goalie. But deep down inside, you still want to see him fail because you want that net so bad.
You need to be a great actor, right?
Yep,
I was acting. Okay. Outside of Vegas, we know that's where so much happened. So let's start with the number one goalie that was out there, and that's Jacob Markstrom. And Vancouver Canucks are still pissed, man. They lost their MVP.
Yep. That's tough. I mean, and here's the thing, like everybody loves Demko right now. I love the performance he had against the Golden Knights, but he's still growing in his game. Had a .905 save percentage this year while Markstrom lit it up and had a tough first half of the year, got better as it went on. I still think there's a lot to see from Thatcher Demko, but I don't know where he's going to end up in a year or two. And that's why it's smart to bring in someone like Holtby, like they did. But you're still missing out on the guy that just carried your team. Like, isn't there value in retaining the guy who got you there? I think. And it's hard to see that. I understand the cap reasons. I understand you've got Pettersson and you've got all these big contracts coming, Quinn Hughes, that you're going to have to pay them. But how many times is it said over and over that a team can't win without a goalie? Right? And Holtby's on a 2-year deal. Does that say he's going to be there long term? I don't think so. I see Seattle looming. So they're banking on Thatcher Demko. And Demko's had a good path so far. He was a mess the first year pro in the American League. Remember watching him and thinking, like, I don't know. To his credit, he was awesome his second year. His third year, he continued to grow. We'll see. They got a great goalie coach there. But, man, that's a tough pill to swallow, especially going to Calgary for Markstrom. Oh, right down the road.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And
oof.
I believe in the theory wholeheartedly. You get a veteran to help with that transition. And I agree with you that Holtby's just really there just long enough to buy more time for Demko.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a part of Demko that would have liked to have the whole ball of wax now and say, hey, don't bring in Holtby. I'll take the net right now?
For sure. I mean, you always want that chance, but I think he's also a smart enough kid to realize he wasn't going to get that. You know, and I don't think that the fan base there is going to let that slip. Like, can Jim Betting run with Thatcher Demko and whoever else they get? If it's like a backup, if it's truly like $1 million contract guy, you can't do that. Like, you can't on a team that is like that close to really knocking on the door with the talent they have. You got to have a plan with that. And again, it goes back to tandems. Like, I think that is truly going to be a scenario where either guy could end up playing more games. Like Braden Holtby's got a lot to prove too. He had a brutal year last season, and he's 2 or 3 years in a row. I mean, the irony of his cup winning season was that was one of his worst regular seasons, and he didn't even start the playoffs. Grubauer did.
Yeah, that's right.
And then he went on an absolute tear. 100% awesome in playoffs, but he hasn't really regained it since. Like, that's a guy who, to me, he's got some stuff to prove if he really wants to stick around in the league, showing that he can be a guy that you can have as an absolute workhorse.
And take another run at that extension that he probably thought he deserved now.
Well, 2 years ago, that's what it looked like, right? Big extension, long term, and we're not seeing it anymore. And across the board, man, especially with COVID, it's just, there's been a depression to everything, whether it's money, term.
Yep.
And if you're not absolutely on the pointy end, you're not getting those things.
So Markstrom had both Edmonton and Calgary bidding on him. He had $5 million over 7 years in Edmonton, and now he was in this scenario. Connor McDavid, or do I take the extra $1 million and 1 year less? That one might have been a tougher decision, even though it financially made more sense to go to Calgary. But who's got the edge moving forward? Who's closer to a Stanley Cup now that Markstrom made his decision?
Well, it's always going to be sexy to say Edmonton. Always. They've got McDavid and Draisaitl. I think that's the refrain we hear all the time. But what they do on the back end, how did they improve the backs? They got Barrie. Okay. Is Barrie going to play shutdown hockey for the Edmonton Oilers?
Ask Toronto Maple Leaf fans.
There you go. I don't see a big difference there. I don't see the goalies being insulated any more than they have in the past to be able to perform better. And I understand that Koskinen's got a big X on his back because he's got a $4.5 million deal, which is absurd. But he actually played pretty well last year through the regular season. You know, his numbers weren't bad at all, but they were okay. And that's the problem. Like, being okay is not good enough in the league, especially in a city like Edmonton. That's the dual-edged sword, though. It's Edmonton. Look how many goalies they've chewed up and spit out of town because they didn't win the Vezina, they didn't win a Stanley Cup. And so you're constantly chasing yourself in that city, and that's what makes it so hard. Like, even if you get Markstrom, if you lock him in for that long term, if they don't win a cup, if he doesn't live up to expectations, he's going to be chewed up and spit out in 2 years anyway.
So where does that leave Mike Smith, who's coming back on a $2 million 1 year deal, when people are disappointed or even crushed that Markstrom didn't pick Edmonton?
I mean, this is tough. It's a great spot for Smitty because he's still getting paid. I love that. Great guy who's earned it. But how does that create any confidence in the market? How does that create confidence with your team that you're coming back with the same guys? You know, and it was very clear that they were looking for an upgrade. That's the hard part, is when you don't get somebody in free agency or through a trade and you just come back with the same guys. That's a letdown in the locker room. That's a letdown to a fan base. You know, are we really putting our best forward to make this happen? You know, for Mike Smith, I mean, it's constantly been a battle to grab the net the last couple of years. Ever since he left Arizona, really, he's fallen into tandem roles. He hasn't grabbed it. He's been at the bottom of the pile in terms of numbers. He's always going to be a guy who's divisive because of the way he handles the puck. And, you know, when he was in Calgary, they could show you statistics on him handling the puck, making his team better.
Yeah.
But man, when he flubs it and turns it over, that'll turn people against you so quick, right? And I think that's the tough part for Smitty, is it's so ingrained in his game and he's so good at it. But every time it happens, it's just a knock against him. We can't keep doing this. We can't keep playing this guy. Man, I don't see this being a deal that puts him in a great position to have a lot of fun unless the team's truly successful. And I'm not sure that they've done enough throughout the rest of the lineup for that to happen.
All right, let's go to the nation's capital. And so many good things have happened to the New York Ranger, for the New York Ranger fans, through free agency, whether it's Panarin or now the first pick overall, Lafreniere, recently signing his entry level contract. But seeing Lundqvist go down the highway and become a Washington Capital, man, that one's going to sting them
forever. Like, this is your guy. Like, I understand the reasoning for it. I understand keeping your young guys around. It all makes sense. And Shesterkin, by all means, this guy's a superstar, going to be. I truly think that, watching him play and talking to everybody that's close to him, They all believe it. But man, like, isn't there some value in the loyalty any longer? You know, your franchise guy that just played 15 years for you, with your team trending upward again with some nice prospects, and I don't know, man. That's hard for me. Like, I would have liked to seen him stay around. And the part that bugs me is it's just the power that's being wielded right now by young goaltenders, especially like the European set that'll just go home. And that's their card, is that, hey, if you don't keep me around, I'm going home, or I'm going to go somewhere else. And the KHL is always looming. And that's powerful, and it holds it against teams, right? Like, you can't put Georgiev back in Hartford. That's what you get. You're going to lose a guy. But I'm bugged by that, you know, the loyalty of it. But for Hank to go to DC, though, to me, that's the best place he could have gone. I'm sure that was tops on his list, because Samsonov's coming off a big injury, apparently. I haven't heard exactly what happened to him this summer, but he wasn't fit to play in the bubble because of something that happened.
So there's a window. There's a window for Hank to come in there and still feel like
100%.
He's a bona fide number one goaltender.
Yeah, and I think Hank too, even in this scenario, is going to think that there's been a little bit of a humble pie though too. Like, he's gone through this now where he's not the guy. I think he'll be better prepared to handle even in a tandem scenario in Washington than he ever was in New York. Because in New York, he was the man, period.
Yeah.
The moment he wasn't the man, it was all sideways there. It wasn't the same. Writing was on the wall. I think now, like, your mindset can switch, that you can accept the role you're given when you choose to accept that role. And he's accepting right now the opportunity to be able to grab it in DC, or to potentially also just ride along shotgun and be needed when necessary if Samsonov takes off. But I do think, though, like, anytime a goalie comes off a big injury, you're worried about them being able to perform, and there is 100% a window. But Laviolette's got to tighten up defensively. The way his team's played in Nashville in front of Rene and Saros the last 2 years,
yeah.
If they don't do that in front of Hank, it might be more of the same.
Okay. You mentioned goaltenders coming off injuries. We look at Corey Crawford. Many thought his career might have been over with his last concussion. He comes back. He plays fairly well in the bubble, to the point where I'm sure Jonathan Taves and Patrick Kane thought he is our goalie that's been there for us and will be there for us again. And yet the financial commitment to go longer than 1 year, I guess, for him wasn't there from Stan Bowman. So he goes off to New Jersey. You want to talk about some veterans ticked off right now? Let's talk about Chicago.
Yeah. Why are they mad? They're mad because they don't have a goalie. They don't have one. They have Malcolm Subban and Colin Delia. So they've got a young kid in Delia who has hardly played any games. He's got 2 years of one way ahead of him. He's played well in the minors. He's had some okay games up top. What do you have? I don't know. If I'm Jonathan Taves, I don't know what I have there. And Malcolm Subban gets cast off from Vegas. Vegas says, we didn't think we could win with him. That's what they said. Now, Malcolm Subban's had 3 years in the NHL to grab a role, not just at backup, even at times when Fleury's been hurt or there's been time off. Subban never grabbed it. He never took that next step to be somebody who could be relied upon. And he gets a 2-year deal in Chicago. You know, I mean, great guy, players love him, but what are you doing there? Like, how do you have legitimacy in your own locker room if you don't have somebody that you know can do it like Crow? Like, even if Crow's had injury problems in the past, you still know he's there. You still know his presence.
Yeah.
And that's where, you know, by Chicago just saying, we're going cheap and goal and we're going to roll the dice. Man, that's a tough pill. And for Crow going to Jersey, I think that's a great play. Like, when Marty Brodeur calls you and says, hey, we want you here. We know that you're not going to be number 1 minutes. We know we need you to support Blackwood. You might end up playing more. You may not. We know what you're getting into, but we're going to give you at least close to market value at 3.9. And you're going to be able to pad your bank a little bit more. How do you turn that down? But that's crushing, though, too, for Crow. You can play your whole career in a place and they can't toss you one more year at anywhere even close to market value. That's tough. And you can see the importance that he had in that locker room might have been more than they thought.
No question that Stan has got himself in some hot water here with some of his veterans, and he's going to have to do something to at least show them that they're not taking a major step back. So we'll watch Chicago real close here. It's Nick Kypreos. I'm with Mike McKenna, studio analyst for the Golden Knights on the AT&T Sportsnet. We're going through the goaltending carousel, and there's a few more stops that we can make. I'll let you choose, Mike. There's the Tuukka Rask situation in Boston. We got Devon Dubnick in San Jose. We got Freddie Anderson staying in Toronto. Anything stand out for you in terms of what you will find the most interesting?
Well, from the real hockey aspect, it's San Jose for me. I don't think bringing in Devon Dubnick after his worst year in the league, arguably, to be paired with a guy who just had his worst year in the league at $9 million combined, I don't think that sends a great message there. I think you're putting Band-Aids on a wound that's bleeding, and I'm not sure if they're getting the help that they need. I don't know enough about Evgeny Nabokov as a goalie coach to be able to trust that he's going to turn Martin Jones around. I don't know if Devon Dubnick's going to be able to go into another new scenario and be successful again. He was when he went to Arizona and he had Sean Burke. Sean Burke took his game, took it to the next level, and once he got to Minnesota, it just progressively went like this. Yeah. And I'm not sure the reasons for that, but he needs a shot of energy, and both of those goalies need some dedicated goalie coaching there. I feel like Jones and Dubnyk both fell behind the curve, maybe a bit of complacency in their games in some way, especially Jones. You've got a deal where you're being paid almost $6 million long-term. And it's easy, Kip, as a goalie where you have a bad season, you just chalk it up and go, it's a bad year. And you think you can just come back the next year and be lights out. And part of that to me for Jones was that the team went really far in playoffs. And I think he took his regular season and just went, whatever. Well, if you do that in today's NHL, goaltending has changed so much in the last 5 years even. Like, we're not talking about 10 years. We're talking about the last 5 years. Post-play, angles, technical stuff. I didn't see it from Jones. I didn't see consistency. I saw, and I don't mean just in terms of goals going, I mean in like just his goaltending in general. He's way out of the net. Then he's deep. Then he's out again. And it's between game to game. That's a mental deal where I could tell he didn't know how he wanted to play, you know? So Nabokov's got his work cut out for him with those two. I don't trust that combo. The Rask deal to me is a non-issue. This guy was, if not the top 3 goalies in the league last year, minimum top 5 in all metrics, goals saved above average, wins, you name it. All the underlying numbers support the real ones. And it just came out. I mean, he had a medical emergency at home with one of his kids, you know, and the whole world jumps on this guy's throat for going home. And that really bugged me, man. Like, it doesn't matter how much a person makes in this world. If they've got a problem at home, if they have any reason why they don't think they can perform, like, to me, he did the most selfless thing he could have done when he left that team, Kip.
Yeah.
You don't need a goalie in net that doesn't feel like they're playing their best. That's a disservice to your teammates. So I think that's a non-starter. I think he'll be back there.
Mike, we know how tough the Boston Bruins fans are.
Oh, it's brutal.
So you tell me, we'll never question how good he is or you know, where he stands in the pecking order of bona fide number 1 goaltenders. He's up there, man. There's no question. The only question we want answered is he in a Boston Bruin uniform when next season starts?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think they can go out and get anything better right now. I mean, unless they make a huge deal, like a huge deal, because he still has value in terms of what other teams feel in terms of how he can play. Like, he's a game-changing goaltender. And there's not many goalies that you could go out and get on a market who's of Vezina quality. The problem is he's got 1 year left on his deal, and there's doubts about how much longer he wants to play. But I think Rask has actually managed the fans in Boston as well as anybody could ever ask. There hasn't been moments where I felt like he was completely fed up with it. I'm sure it weighs on him, but like, if you're not named Tim Thomas in that city,
yeah,
like, and even like, I mean, it was so hard on Timmy that he left for a year. He said that's enough. Like, he took a year off. That's how hard it was. Like, and I think Tuukka's managed it as well as anybody can, because that market is tough. Like, I look at markets that you wouldn't want to play in at times. Montreal, Boston, Toronto, 100%. And that, to me, that's another great example. Like, can we go get somebody better than Freddie Anderson and get some term on a deal? Because you'd have to have term if you're going longer for there, wouldn't you? You have to.
So where does that leave Freddie Anderson? Because Freddie Anderson has done a pretty good job of getting him in the playoffs. And you can argue that he wasn't good enough to advance in the playoffs. But nobody would ever question how good he is in the regular season. Now you find out that they were shopping you, and to our earlier conversation, you might have tried to go cheaper, find a 1 and a 1A, and not spend north of $5 million anymore on a goaltender. And yet they couldn't find it. Mm-hmm. So now they got to go and talk publicly about bringing him back, and he's our guy. Where does this leave Freddie Anderson mentally?
I think you're, as many votes of confidence as you get, I think you're swimming in circles here a little bit. You're thinking, do these guys really believe in me? And I know there's been open lines of communication. Like I've heard Kyle Dubas say that he's talked to Freddie the whole time, that they've been in communication. And hey, yeah, you know what? That's nice. There's a little bit of value in that. But the bottom line is they're still shopping you.
Yeah, that's right.
And like if you're on the chopping block, how do you feel? How do you perform?
Yeah.
And especially for him, he's getting older now. He's over 30. His next contract's going to be an important one again. And he's either going to turn into somebody who's getting paid or who's also ran. And that's going to be the label. Again, it all comes down to labels for goalies. And right now the label on Anderson is he can't make the big save in playoffs. Is that fair? Man, fair's cotton candy. That's what you get at the fair. Who knows, man? But whether that's true or not, that's a label he has, and he's got to shake it. I don't know. I don't have the confidence right now that he's got the confidence that he's going to be able to come in there and knock the doors down. I don't have that. I feel like he feels like his time right now is up in Toronto. That's how I'd feel. I feel like this is one season and then I'm out the door because they either don't believe me, they're going to go for somebody else, or it just isn't going to work out.
It was easier in my heyday when you had a guy like Grant Fuhr and everything rolled off his back.
Yeah.
And, just so you know, Mike, you're the one that brought Grant Fuhr up.
Rolled onto his knee.
Stop that. Stop that right now. I've got a book coming out next week. It's called Undrafted, and I talk a lot about my situation there with the St. Louis Blues fans and my relationship with Grant Fuhr as well. So keep an eye on that. And yes, I do believe I make amends with the St. Louis Blue fans when I predicted a year before their Stanley Cup that they were going to win their first one in franchise history. So
good call.
Give me some kudos on that, please.
Yeah. Well, the problem is that they don't see that happen playing out live in their living rooms.
Yes, I know. Hey,
but your point about Grant is 100% correct, though. There's a guy who didn't phase him. I remember, I don't know whether it was 96, 7, 8, whenever it may have been, a first round against the Phoenix Coyotes in the team's Game 7, and he goes and plays a round of golf in the morning, goes out and has a shutout that night. And wears brand new pads out of the box when nobody ever did that back then. You wonder why a guy has 5 Stanley Cups.
God.
There you go.
So much fun to watch and so much fun to listen to. And I'm sure just hearing stories from Mark Messier and Wayne, having him as a teammate and watching it on a daily basis, how much energy and fun and competitiveness they all had on a daily basis.
And he caught with his right hand. It's important. I caught with my right hand, and I actually used a Grant Fuhr's pattern stick my whole career. So
did you caught with your right?
I did. Yeah. So, and that's a big point with Askarov going so early. Everybody made a big deal this year that this guy catches with his right hand. Like, it's unheard of. 5 Stanley Cups, Grant Fuhr. Tom Barrasso, 2 Stanley Cups.
My favorite goaltender growing up with Mike Palmateer, and he had the goofy hand too, but there's not a lot of them, is there?
No, it's dropped off a little bit. I mean, we had, let's see, Francouz is one of the latest guys to come in. Hiller, Hutchinson, Vaucoon was very, very good. Jose Theodore won a Hart.
I was just going to say Theodore was the closest that we had, in terms of what we thought was going to be maybe the next Grant Fuhr.
Yep, 100%. Louis Domingue's still around too. So we're out there. I think it just is, you go to a sports store and they don't have many gloves in your right hand, and a lot of kids just pick up the left, and that's what they play with. It's actually easy to learn to catch with either hand. It's just hard to learn how to shoot.
Does that mean part. you guys think with the wrong side of your brain? Is that all come into play?
We're creative. Everybody says that goalies are weird and we're creative. We're the art kids of hockey.
Well, we're certainly glad you came here to create a little bit of clarity in the carousel for us here, Mike. Certainly appreciate your time and clearing up a little bit on what the fans can look for between the pipes, hopefully in early January. Mike McKenna, thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure. Hey, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
We'll do it again soon. Mike McKenna, everybody, studio analyst for the Golden Knights. Our thanks to Mike McKenna, analyst for Vegas Golden Knights. Great conversation on what's going on with the goaltenders. I got to tell you, I don't agree with him. I think Tuukka Rask is in another uniform come next season other than the Boston Bruins. Also working on some big interviews coming up. Don't want to give it away, but I think you're going to want to watch this one as early as next week. So look for that. So for all of you watching and listening, thanks for joining me, and we'll see you next time.